that little button. Oops, and then make sure your sound is turned off. Yeah. It feeds back.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
Interesting tip. Feedback is a mass noun, so it don't have a plural.
Yeah.
Either feedback or feedbacks.
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
just feedback.
Okay, this should be on. And you sent me this. I'll go upstairs and make sure it works. But,
Okay.
Great.
So
Because
is this address the same as yesterday's?
I'm gonna leave this to you. What? I think it's yesterday's because that's your channel now.
Okay.
And I'll leave these with you.
So what should I do later?
Somebody wants to go talk. You can say we're doing this experiment, live streaming.
Before
Sign it if they're okay with it, but they don't have to.
they don't have to.
Make sure they don't have to. They know they don't have to consent if they don't want to keep video.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll see how it goes upstairs.
I'm not clear. So am I staying in this?
Is that okay?
I'm okay.
For the next session?
Yeah.
Just make sure they can see it in the video. The best
So
way
it's
to
already on?
the best way to monitor. Yeah, it's streaming right now. So the best way to monitor it is like
Okay.
this, and just point it where people can see the speakers. I don't think anybody's watching because we haven't posted the link anywhere. But I'll go check it upstairs,
Okay.
and I'll send you a little message if it's working
Okay.
from up there. Thanks.
Oh, excellent.
So we're gonna do this one. No, they don't have to. Mingyu will send it back to give it a shot. Okay, cool. Next one will be upstairs.
Yeah, so kind of like it is. It's like or like a
It's just a lot of change made up, but I think it's better.
Okay, good. Do you want to talk about it at lunch?
also considering his age probably.
No, it's up to you. We can if you want.
Do you mean talk about the change?
Yeah.
Maybe I mean it will not take long.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
It might take long.
What's the date today? 直播
你不是都拿版了，你还怎么
就是接下来。
Does it mean I have to sign one of these?
I don't know if the speaker is allowed to has no problem to be streamed alive in signing. I might want the coverage stream on the YouTube channel and people can see it from there.
Is anybody watching?
Let's
One.
see. If there's one, that's me. Yeah, one.
I still don't like this form.
Francis made it, I think.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't specify.
About the stream.
No, it doesn't specify that it's only for today.
It didn't mention the
Exactly.
conference.
There's no limitation on the scope of this document. I've signed like 2 or 3 of these, and it's just always like. But.
There's. You're not gonna abuse the video, but.
No, I know. I just this form always weirds
Yeah.
me out.
So should I stop streaming if the speaker doesn't agree?
Yeah. What? What's the date today?
29.
29th? Yeah.
So I'll ask who's doing the presentation later, right?
Yeah. Because I guess we have a few minutes.
Okay, the reference doesn't count. So minus 28. Hopefully.
Do you still to know this?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
So it's
Doing the presentation later.
so this guy's not here.
So just the student Kili and Heidi. Seems to have a presentation.
Is that chair not doing it?
Are any of you presenting?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
So in the next session, on Sundays.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get a laptop hooked up,
You can try.
yeah.
Just put it out there. Your way, but I can check.
Yeah. And also, we're doing an experiment with live streaming these.
Oh, okay.
So if you are okay with being live streamed, we need a signature. Or we got
You should send just that session or the other ones?
all of them as well. Yeah.
You should send like that.
Where is it going? Like on the
YouTube channel.
Oh, okay. I think that's okay.
Do we have the YouTube channel so
Yeah.
we can tell people to?
To check the channel, there is a link for this channel. This is the address to search it. So there's a name for this.
Is there a name for its channel?
I don't know. Still created from my account, so it's still in my YouTube account.
Oh, okay. What's the easiest way to share that around?
Yeah, we have to like set a meter, confirm and then say the password.
It'll be text to it, so it's fine. Where did you put the signature?
Oh, thank you so much.
The 29th.
It's just like this, and when people is watching, that is me.
Oh, okay. So it's very popular. Channel.
That's very generous.
Are they up later on too?
I think it's public.
Okay. I might want to watch myself.
Yeah, each one is on a different channel. We're test running here for a conference we're going to host in the spring.
Okay. Yeah. I thought this doesn't make sense. Okay,
Better self
million.
So it's already starting now. Yeah, there's sound.
Oh,
Okay, cool.
better this time. Yeah, it's better. How's your life going?
And it's yeah, but there's all.
Okay. So Yari Kiwi.
Yeah, there's like all yard.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So welcome to the second session of the day in this room. This is the semantics session. And our first presentation today is Kili Moro and Yuhani Yari. There it is. Yari Kili. And Kili is here to present. So there you go.
So yes, hello, I'm Keely. I'm from the University of Alberta and a master's student there, and Yuhani is my supervisor. The stuff I'm presenting on today is actually my honors thesis. Alright, so I was looking at implicit anaphora. So implicit anaphora are when you have an ambiguous pronoun that refers to an antecedent that wasn't previously mentioned in context. This would contrast with explicit anaphora. So the antecedent with an explicit anaphora can be something where it was actually said in the conference and you're referring back to it, or it can just be very highly salient in the visual context. And so sometimes we use gesture and that kind of thing to indicate the reference there. So I have an example of implicit here. So if speaker A was like, oh, he really needs to shave, and someone was like, yeah, it's getting really long. We know that it usually means beard, because part of it's contextual. We know that a guy usually shaves a beard as opposed to his legs or arms. And then shave also, part of the meaning of the verb is that we need to remove hair or something like that. And so these kinds of references are frequently used in everyday speech, as shown by corpus studies, in both reading, in both writing, but also quite frequently in spoken speech. So what mediates the resolution of those? Because they're not intuitively that easy to resolve. So reading studies have shown that concept centrality is a factor in resolving an implicit anaphora. So if the intended referent is nuclear or central to the predicate, meaning is it part of the definition? So with shave, hair would be a central kind of referent to the definition of shave. They can be, Cornish and his colleagues found that they can be resolved just as easily as an explicit pronoun. There's no processing cost. However, with peripheral, so something that's still related to your predicate, but maybe not a part of it, so maybe like a razor or maybe the context of a bathroom or something like that, where you might shave. When someone tries to throw that into an implicit anaphora structure, there's a processing cost, which indicates that it's not actually that easy to resolve. So it seems like we can't just throw any word into that structure. However, Stanford and the colleagues there have found that plural pronouns in English are resolved faster than singular. So it doesn't matter. They haven't actually looked at the central versus peripheral distinction, but they just found as long as you use they instead of it, these should be, there's no processing cost. And this might not be that people aren't necessarily finding the referent and resolving that ambiguity, but rather that plural pronouns, we kind of accept them as ambiguous. So an example would be institutional they. That's when we say things like, oh, they're digging up the road again. and we're referring to maybe the government, maybe the construction workers. We don't really know, but we use they to refer to someone, and we continue on happily processing the rest of the dialogue without getting caught up on finding the actual referent for they there. So in my study, I decided to use a visual world paradigm to see if visual context would facilitate the resolution of implicit pronouns. Part of this reason is language is multimodal, so evidence from the McGurk effect and research and situation models show that we do actually use a lot of our visual and motor cortices when we process and produce language. Also, as I previously mentioned, if something's highly salient in the visual context, it can be considered almost an explicit reference instead of implicit. And then I also included in my dialogues examples of peripheral and central reference and plural or singular pronouns, just to see if there's an interaction with these effects, and if one of those effects is maybe more prominent or more necessary than the others for processing. So to get my central and peripheral reference, I decided to have my reference be related to the protagonist of my dialogues. So for an example, I would have a dentist, and then I did 2 pre-tests. So in the first one here, I had like a paper and I just gave it to participants, and it was sort of like an open response. So they read that A and B, and then they had to answer, well, what was pulled in the end, and they could answer whatever they wanted. And so with those, if we got 80% consistency with the same answer, we just took that answer as being a plausible referent. So this would be a central example. So teeth is part of the definition of dentist, so teeth was the central one. We had another option for peripheral ones, which people on a different list would do, and that was it used in the end or not? And then we could say what was used. And the most common response there was a drill. And those were countervalued, so people got both central and peripheral reference there. After we did those, we had another group of participants do a rating test. So they would have like a topic, dentist, and it would say, how related are these things, i.e., how often would you associate these things? And they had a scale from, oh, they never appear together, to they would always appear together. And there we had the central and peripheral reference on different lists. So someone would see a peripheral reference in a list, or they would see a central, so that there was no kind of like association or priming from the list itself. And we took words as being with a score of 5.5 or higher as being a central referent, and words with a 4 or lower, or not a 4, a 5 or lower, because obviously a drill is still going to be more related than maybe an umbrella to a dentist. As being the peripheral referent, if anything was, like if what we thought might be a peripheral referent ended up hitting a 7, we would remove that item from our list. And then we ran just a basic t-test to make sure that the averages between our central and peripheral reference were significantly different. So that left us with 24 experimental dialogues, which we counterbalanced for whether it was an explicit or implicit reference, was the intended reference central or peripheral, and was the referent and then the pronoun singular or plural. So, for example, if I wanted to give this a peripheral implicit reading, speaker A would say, the dentist saw me last week, I was in terrible pain. And then speaker B would say, oh, were they eventually used by her in the end or not? And then speaker A would just respond. There, they is referring to drills. If you wanted to make that explicit, the dialogue would have been, the dentist saw me last week, the drills made a terrible noise, and then it would continue as follows. And then while that dialogue was playing, participants would see this image on a screen. So you have the protagonist, a dentist, your central referent, the tooth, a peripheral referent, the drill, and then just a distractor image. And that's a singular condition versus a plural condition there. And so when we ran the experiment, just to limit the number of items that each participant would have to do, we broke it into a singular experiment and a plural experiment. But then within those, they each had 4 lists that were counterbalanced. So each participant within those experiments saw examples of implicit and explicit reference, as well as central and peripheral reference. We ended up getting 28 native English speakers in each experiment, and then we recorded where they looked at the pronoun onset and then the verb onset. So you can see in the dialogue here, the speaker B has it in passive voice, so that the pronoun comes before the verb. That keeps the pronoun ambiguous. And then the verb should disambiguate as to whether, when we say pulled, do we that would be more appropriate for a tooth as opposed to a drill based on the items on the screen. And the peripheral ones weren't all as ambiguous as used. We did have stuff like we had an oven, which was preheated and stuff, so for the most part, the verbs were quite disambiguating. Right. So for our analysis, we took the number of looks and proportioned them into 20 millisecond bins and just calculated the proportion there. So what proportion of looks went to the appropriate referent versus elsewhere. We measured from 200 milliseconds after the pronoun onset, and this is just consistent with the literature, where it takes about 200 milliseconds for you to process something and then move your eyes to reflect that change. And then we went up to 400 milliseconds afterwards, and that was so that we didn't catch any effects of the verb after that. Then we also looked at the verb onset, and we took a window that was the same size as our pronoun onset. And then we took a second window just to look at any later integration effects. So kind of once everything's been said and done, you have that oh moment. And then we did a linear regression model on the data. And so the model that had the best fit had an interaction between number, explicitness, and centrality. So these are the results of the pronoun onset. So we did find a significant three-way interaction such that if you had a plural, explicit, central referent, you were more likely to look at the correct referent, which is consistent with the previous literature. And then we also found an interaction with number and explicitness, which is a little bit counterintuitive, such that if you have an explicit referent and it's plural, you might actually be less likely to look at that. So I'll get into that a bit later. This interaction went away by the verb onset, but we did get a few interesting ones. So again, explicitness, if you had an explicit anaphora, it was much more likely to be resolved than an implicit one, which is pretty consistent with even just intuition there. However, once explicitness starts interacting with number, it becomes less likely. So as an explicit reference becomes plural, you're less likely to look at it. And as an explicit reference becomes central, there was a trending effect showing that, again, you were less likely to look at it. So again, that's a little counterintuitive, but again, we'll go into that as we go. So now I'm going to go through some of the graphs that we made. I think this does a better job of illustrating sort of what was actually going on. So the bottom, the x-axis is the time scale. You have a dotted line at the 200 millisecond mark. And then the darkest line is looks to the protagonist. Then it goes, the second darkest is your central referent. And the kind of mid-gray there is your peripheral, and distractor is the lightest one there. So you can see in the explicit condition, this is for the singular study, you have, before the pronoun even, you have a high number of looks to the correct reference. So this is the central referent, and you have a higher activation of the central referent there. And here you do have an activation of the peripheral referent, although it's kind of meshing with that protagonist, so it's not quite a significant effect there. But this might be, the reason we might not see a peak after the onset of the pronoun might just be because it's already been mentioned, they found that reference, they don't really need to look at it. In the implicit condition, remember they haven't heard it yet, and you can see that there's really no resolution. The central and peripheral are kind of overlapping, although there is a lot of looks to the protagonist. So that's inconsistent with Cornish's study, where they found that central and implicit referents were resolved at the same, like just as quickly as an explicit referent. So we didn't find that. However, once we get to the disambiguating verb, our results are kind of consistent with Cornish's. So you can see here, yes, the protagonist is activated, but the peripheral and the central referent do separate, and you do see a significant number of looks in the central condition, whereas in the peripheral condition for the implicit anaphora, you don't get that separation. So here we are seeing an effect of centrality, where at least by the time they hit the verb, now they moved more towards the correct referent, whereas in the peripheral condition they did not. And then lastly, these are the late integration effects. And so here you can see a really clear result where, like, yes, they finally got that central implicit reference. And they sort of get that peripheral peripheral one at the end. They definitely get it above the central referent, but it never really peaks out on its own. So just a summary of our singular results. We did see, centrality helped out in the resolution of the peripheral reference, but we saw that effect on the verb, not the pronoun, unlike conditional. And so we can also say that maybe visual context didn't play a role because we would have expected them to figure out by the pronoun if they had those visual cues there, or to do better, not worse than the Cornish study. All right, and then we looked at our plural study, which actually gave us really weird results. It wasn't as clear as the singular study. So with the plural study, we see at the pronoun onset, coming off of the explicit condition, they definitely have that peripheral referent, and they've really activated it, which is kind of interesting. And here the central referent doesn't actually show that much activation with regard to the peripheral or the protagonist there. It might be significantly different from the peripheral, but it's hard to tell because that protagonist confidence intervals kind of overlaps with both of them. And then when we get to the implicit condition, we have a really weird effect where they've now activated the peripheral, but they haven't done anything in the actual peripheral condition. So that's kind of unexpected, especially since it's implicit and it should have been almost the same context until this point. And so that might just be a confounding variable. We're not quite sure why they did that. Then when we get to the verb onset, where things should start to become a bit more clear, we see here that they're starting to get that peripheral referent near the end of this window here. So peripheral referent appears to be being resolved and significantly different from the central referent, whereas that central referent is a mess. They're looking everywhere except maybe the distractor here. And then we look at that later integration effects. Yeah, they do get the peripheral referent, which is opposite to the singular, and they never really get that central referent. It just stays kind of this huge mess between the protagonist, peripheral, and central. Right, so plural pronouns were obviously a little bit more difficult to resolve. There's a lot more overlap between each of the potential reference there. We did get a late effect for the implicit peripheral referent, but they just never resolved the central. And again, the explicit and implicit conditions weren't similar, so that contradicts previous research saying that plural reference are resolved just as quickly as explicit reference. So a quick summary, we did confirm that we had a three-way interaction. If one effect is stronger, explicitness is the one that's statistically supported and seems to be the kind of obvious answer that yes, it's easier to resolve an explicit pronoun than an implicit. For number, plural seemed to be more difficult than singular, and for centrality, we did get late integration effects, but only in the singular condition. And fortunately, visual context did not facilitate pronoun resolution. It didn't seem to help anyone disambiguate anything. They seemed to remain relatively confused. And so just a further discussion of that. So why didn't the visual context facilitate? Well, it could be that the semantic link is more important than just the context that you're surrounded with. So perhaps visual context can't compensate when you have that really far peripheral or heavily implied referent. You might just not even know where to look. Also, maybe we don't rely on visual context when we're using a visual world paradigm unless we actually need extra help. So with that implicit peripheral spike near the end of the plural experiment, presumably a peripheral referent is going to be the most difficult thing to activate since it's more distantly related from the protagonist than the protagonist itself, or a central referent. So it might have been that maybe they were looking at the one that was difficult to activate to increase that activation and to keep it as an equal competitor with the other more active ones while they tried to figure out which one was the actual referent. But ultimately, visual context didn't really reflect any sort of amazing processing there on its own. And then for the plural reference, we would have expected if plural ones were easier to resolve just because they're plural, we would have expected more looks. But instead, this seems to support the idea that it's okay to have an empty search when you have a plural referent. So empty search means that you don't have to find the referent and you can just keep looking around the page and it's not going to give you a big processing cost. So that might be consistent with Sanford's reasoning that pronouns just don't need a referent, and that's why we can read them faster. And then you'll notice that there were a ton of looks to the protagonist, so I realized afterwards that this might have been a confounding factor in my results. It could be because the protagonist was the only human object on the screen. They're also the topic of the discussion and the first mention, so it's a pretty highly salient entity. Also, when I put my words into passive voice, I added the implication that there's going to be an agent of this action, and so that might have biased participants to look towards the protagonist who was the agent as well. And then, even though the protagonist was singular, we can use they to refer to singular third-person people in English, and so it could be too that, at least in the plural experiment, when they heard the word they, the protagonist was a valid candidate as the referent of that pronoun. So, looking ahead, I'm currently in the process of actually analyzing a self-paced listening paradigm that I used. So, I used the same dialogues and I just cut them up, and so participants just hit it after they're done listening. The previous experiments that have been done on implicit anaphora have either used self-paced listening or self-paced reading, so it'll be interesting to see if I can replicate the effects in that study, and then maybe it's a matter of what paradigm you're using to when these effects show up. Also, I'd like to compare passive versus active constructions to see if that was actually a confounding factor in my analysis, but I'm not totally sure how to make a natural sentence where an ambiguous pronoun comes before the verb in English without using passive voice, so I'm open to suggestions there. That is everything. And those are my references if you want to see them. Thank you.
Plenty of time for questions.
Have you looked, or do you have any plans to look at individual differences? So, do you know how much your listeners differ from each other?
We did, like we have like a generic kind of language background. Like they were native speakers, but like we could get second languages. And then we have, and like that also includes like whether they were male or female. And then we did run actually the Mine in the Eyes and the Empathy Quotient questionnaire, just because my supervisor was like, oh, let's fill it out one last thing. So I do actually have that information that I could pull into it as well, but.
I meant it in terms of their results. Like
how much I
individuals
see, like looking
differ
at it,
from
like
each other
I
in
see.
the
That
pattern.
might be interesting too, especially for the self-paced listening one, because right now those results, there's a lot of variation in the speakers. So yeah, that would actually be probably helpful. But I hadn't planned on doing it, but now I kind of want to.
Someone else could do it. Could take up some mental.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that bit at the end about the protagonist and the singular they, because that was what I was wondering as soon as I saw those high spikes towards the protagonist.
Yeah.
Was, could they just be trying to do a singular they?
Yeah.
So one thing that, I don't know, maybe this is why looking at those individual speaker differences might be interesting, to see if there's something about the gender of your participants and how they're using singular they, especially given that the sample stimulus you gave us has a gender stereotype challenging profession. You've got a female dentist there, which is already priming people to think, oh, maybe something with gender is going on here. So that might be, I hate saying these kinds of things, that maybe those introduce confounds into our studies, but they might do.
Yeah, well, even like the study that I cited saying that, it's totally fine, there's no processing cost associated with singular they, that falls apart once you have a really stereotyped profession. So if you use they to refer to a nurse as opposed to she, even if you are referring to a male nurse, it causes that same processing Yeah, it might be a thing. It doesn't really explain the spikes in the singular condition though, so
Oh.
there might be something else at play too.
But no, and you're absolutely right. The challenge of getting an ambiguous pronoun before a verb in English is
Yeah, and then to rule out the protagonist as being part of the potential reference.
Mhm.
Yeah, the other studies, I think, well, one of them used verbs, and so somehow they worked that out. But then one of them was in Spanish, and I don't know how they structured theirs. And then I actually got my dialogues from a German study where you can just put the object beforehand, and it doesn't really change it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've done that in Korean before. It's beautiful. It's the verb is named anyway. But maybe there's a way that you could try and break the dialogue across two sentences somehow, so that the ambiguous pronoun is in the first sentence and it's just something nice and neutral in the first sentence, and the second sentence has a verb that is actually giving you what was going on.
I think I might do that. Seems like the easiest way to do it.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Thank the speaker. Yeah. And just in case anybody is trying to madly dash between rooms, we'll wait until the 11:45 to start for the next one. Because going between rooms is a thing. Because going between rooms is a thing, yes. What is like just any semantics? Well, the place to start is the semantics of so she's the formal semanticist. Unless you want to do an case, there's some people that try to do that. But no, Lisa Matherson's got stuff on Blackwood for sure. She's done some quantifier scope and stuff. Semantics necessarily, but like start from Lisa Matheson and let's look at who she has written stuff with. Like I know she and a bunch of other Eastern folks have done things like modality in different First Nations languages. But I don't know if they did any other ones. Mostly did BC languages or early on country languages. Yeah.
We did.
No, Lisa Matheson is the inroad to that book. No problem.
Yeah, we were
Are you postdoc as well?
No, I was
Instructor. Okay, awesome. Okay, in the linguistics. I'm from Lethbridge. I'm an instructor.
Okay, so we'll start back up with the second talk of this session, and we have Katie Lou. Okay. Also with Juhani Jarakiri, and this talk is titled "Early Semantic Effects in a Large-Scale English Mask Priming Experiment."
Yes. So I'm a PhD student at University of Perth, and this is a research project I have done with my supervisor, Juhani Jarakiri. And what we did is we looked at early semantic effects in morphological processing and in English. So first, sit down. First, a few words about the background. So currently, the most prominent morphological processing model is still the obligatory sublexical decomposition effects approach, which claims that all complex words are automatically decomposed into morphemic parts, and that only based on the form. So it doesn't matter if you have a real complex word, just such as talker, for example, which can be parsed into talk and ER, or you have a pseudo-complex word, just like brother or corner, which could be as well parsed into corn and ER, or broth and ER, but it doesn't make any sense semantically. Most people in research still see those as similarly processed, at least in early on in processing. The most prominent study claiming that is the Russell et al. 2004 paper, and they compared semantically transparent and semantically unrelated opaque pairs. So words such as talker and corner, and they primed then talker with talk and corner with corn. And what they find in their study is that those words are processed as exactly the same. So both facilitate processing. So when you see talker before the talk or corner before corn, doesn't make a difference. And they also added a third condition, which is formulated pairs. So they had a prime corner, just such as corner and then corn. And in this condition, there was no effect whatsoever, no facilitation and no inhibition. There's another quite prominent study by Longtin and Mingyu, 2005, and they find that the same effect, basically, that the pseudo-complex words and morphologically transparent complex words are early on processed the same, and the semantic effect comes in only later on in processing. So if people have more time, but the early effects are identical. However, there is quite a lot of also counter evidence. So here are some of the papers I found evidence against the obligatory sublexical decomposition. For example, Ruppel et al. 2008 found no long-lasting effects for the pseudo-complex words, so for corner words, whereas for transparent complex words such as talker, the effects stayed. Feldman et al. 2009 compared priming with semantically transparent and opaque derived words. And what they found is that whereas departure facilitated target depart, and department didn't facilitate the depart. So whereas in departure and depart you can clearly see the semantic connection, in department and depart it's not there, and there was also no facilitation. Järvi et al. 2009 found that both corner words and toggle words facilitate processing, but the effect for opaque words such as corner is significantly less, it's significantly smaller. And their later paper by 2011 looked at the interaction effects in primes and targets, and what they found is that inhibition exists when morphological family size for the prime is larger than the family size for the target. So morphological family size is all the compound and derived words that share the same stem as prime or than the target. So in our study, based on that background, we developed two research questions. First, we were interested, again, do transparent and pseudo-complex primes facilitate word recognition the same way? So if we believe that one Russell et al. 2004, we might expect it to facilitation and the effect is the same. But if we see the later counter evidence, we expect maybe there is some difference. And the second question we had is, do the relationship between the prime and target word properties, so different lexical, semantic, and affective properties influence lexical processing? So the latest study by Järvi et al. 2011 found that interaction effects in morphological family size. And we wanted to elaborate on that and look at frequency and morphological family size and different properties. So how did we do that? We used a standard way, like standard method that early morphological processing effects are tested on. So this is a mass priming lexicalization task, which was developed by Forster and Davis in the 80s. So how does it work? So you first see a fixation cross on the word on the screen for 1,000 milliseconds, then hashtags appear, and then only for a short period of time, from 50 milliseconds or a bit more or a bit less, the prime appears. And finally the target appears, and you have to make a decision, is it a word or a non-word? And the short prime word is supposed to be something subconscious, so people don't actually see it. It's kind of a video effect, so you basically see the hashtags, and most people only see targets. However, we did ask the people, and actually there were quite many people in both non-native and native speaker group that actually also saw the target, also saw the prime. So it might not be that subconscious and automatic effect. And some people are really fast in processing and they can see the prime, which is interesting. Our participants were both native and non-native speakers of English from University of Alberta, undergrad linguistics, mostly linguistic students. So we had 77 native speakers, 59 of them were female, so the majority was again female, and the median age was 20. And we had approximately the same amount of non-native speakers, so 66, and 44 of them female, and median age 20. As our items, we used similar stimuli as the Russell et al. 2004 paper, so we had 4 different conditions, 40 prime and target pairs in each condition. So first we had transparent condition, where the prime was morphologically transparent words such as corns, and the target was corn. Then we had pseudo-complex words, so corner and the corner as prime and as target corn. Then we had form condition, corner and corn, so where you can parse the complex word, or like it's not a complex word, so you can see the morphemic parts here. Whereas in corner you can see corn and corn, so it's just a formal overlap only. And finally we had control, so where there was no connection whatsoever, so eyes and corn, for example. For our analysis, we used generalized additive mixed effect regression model, which is an advanced regression technique, which allows to use item and subject variability effect. So you can automatically include that subjects differ between each other and also items, and the model takes care of that. And what is the second benefit of CAMS is that it allows you to look at nonlinear interactions between independent variables. Yes. So our dependent variable was the response time for the target, so the time it took them to respond after they've seen the prime and the target. And then we had several independent variables. First, the conditions, so the 4 conditions I showed you before, so transparent form and pseudo-complex. Then nativeness, either participants or native or non-native speakers of English. Then frequency of the target and the prime one. Then morphological family size. And finally, we look at the 2 rating task norms. So first, age of acquisition, which measures the age that people acquire the word. So previous literature on just looking at lexification has found that people are faster with words that are acquired earlier. And finally, emotional arousal, so how intense emotion a word evokes in a person. So it's again based on the ratings of the people, and what people have found is that the more stronger the emotion is for a word, the longer it takes them. So a word such as disease might take longer than a word just as stable because it has a more emotional aspect. And here are effects. So first, nativeness, which was it was expected that native speakers would be faster, and that's what we also found. So on average, native speakers are about 100 milliseconds faster than the non-native speakers. So the 1% of native speakers and 0 non-native speakers. Second, the condition. So one of the effects was our main interest. We see that the transparent condition facilitates significantly the processing cost. The confidence interval are quite large, so it's not a really strong effect, but you see a facilitation for pairs such as corn and corns. Whereas for opaque words, there was no effect whatsoever, so there was either facilitation nor inhibition. And for corner words, you see inhibition. So people were significantly slower when seeing word pairs such as corn and corns, which contradicts the Russell et al. 2004 paper, which claimed that there should be no effect whatsoever. And what applies for for opaque words, you expect to get facilitation, but we get no effect. Okay. Then further, the interaction effect. So what you see here is a CAM interaction plot. How do you read this plot? So on the x-axis you see the target log frequency, and on the y-axis you see the log frequency of the prime. And yellow colors present slower reaction times, and blue colors present faster reaction time. And the missing parts are then that there was no data, so there was no items that were both at both really low frequency, for example. And you can see, what you can see basically is that people were the fastest when the target word had a really, really high frequency, but the prime had a low frequency. So there was a significant interaction. And again, they were the slowest when the prime was really infrequent. No, the prime was really frequent, but the target was really infrequent. So it really seems to matter what's the relationship between the prime target. And effects for prime are clearly present. What you would expect, you don't get any effects for prime whatsoever because it's such a fast subconscious effect. Okay, further morphological family size, which is kind of shows you similar effects. So words with small prime log family size and high target family size are processed the fastest. And again, the slowest effects are for the primes, for the words that have really high prime family size and really low target family size. Similar effect for the age of acquisitions. So the fastest were the words that had both low age of acquisition scores for prime and target. And final effect, emotional arousal, which was people were the fastest with in the situation where the prime arousal was high, but the target arousal was small. So around here. Okay, summary of the results. So condition corn facilitated corn, corner inhibits corn, and corner had no effect of corn. So the only condition that facilitated was the transparent complex pair. And the interaction results, so fastest priming across conditions for primes with low frequency and targets with high frequency, primes with small morphological family size and targets with large morphological family size, primes and targets acquired early, and primes with low arousal and targets with high arousal. So as for discussion, those results are compatible with Feldman and what Feldman and Järgi have found, so early whole form frequency and semantic effects, but they challenge Russell at all because we don't find any presentation for pseudo-complex words, and we do get the effect for the formal addition. Second, the use of large-scale knowing data in morphological processing is relatively new, but as we saw, it seems to show significant effect, so it's a promising method to use in this kind of paradigm further. And finally, how we think what might trigger these results is that only a few studies have actually used a clear within item design. So we designed our items with that we use the same stem or pseudo stem, and all the primes were based on the same stem. So we had corner, and corns for the corn, whereas other studies have used different primes for the same. So they have used like in one condition like dog and dog birds, and in other like brother and brother. So there was not the same pseudo stem. So for conclusions, first, like I've said, transparent condition facilitated processing, whereas pseudo-complex condition had no effect on processing. Second, the interaction between the lexical, semantic, and affective properties of the prime and target have the largest effect on recognition. So the condition effect by itself had a quite low significance, whereas all the interactions effect were really significant in the model and explained a lot of variance. And finally, we think those two findings challenge the obligatory sublexical decomposition and processing approach, and that the processing of complex words seems not to be form-based, but affected by the properties of the whole complex word early on. Thank you.
Okay, we have lots of time for questions.
Kind of an incidental question. I apologize for this, but you mentioned that a lot of people are seeing the primes.
Because we asked them.
How many out of your 150 or so participants?
I think it was like 1/3, and for native speakers it was more, because clearly they are like more familiar with language.
That's incredible.
Wow.
It's a lot, and like usually people, I think they don't ask that, or they don't like take that into account.
They don't bother to ask them whether they saw it.
Yeah. So it actually, like, they claim it's something kind of subconscious effect and subconscious.
And did you
person
include those people that saw them?
Yeah, I added also in the model, like, if they saw or not as a predictor.
I think Ken Forster ought to hear about that, because I'm pretty sure he says 1 in 100.
Yeah.
Would it help eliminate that effect if the prime was sandwiched in between hash marks? Like you have hash marks before and after? Or does that make much of a difference?
I think the idea is that the prime is backward masked by the target.
I guess so. It just seems hash marks block out more if you are getting like after image or something.
Then you separate them to the,
Oh.
maybe you lose the activation due to the
So are you just asking like people like, okay, did you see anything?
We asked that at the end. That was like the
Like,
question.
is
I
there-
didn't run the study about that.
Okay, I was like just wondering if there's any like
And it's like
they
we can be
know
clear.
like they were supposed to see something,
Yeah.
so then they just say, yeah, I saw it, but you don't actually.
Yeah.
It's
And
very subjective to just kind of yes or no.
Yeah, I know. And it wasn't actually insignificant in the model either. So it was, I added that, but it didn't seem to matter. And it was like a.
So that sounds more like I saw something.
Yeah,
was
yeah.
there,
And that was
but
like,
I didn't- yeah, okay. And I think that's.
They saw, yeah, like it's not clear, but clearly as the effect of prime is present in different measures like frequency, and so they must have seen it somehow. Otherwise, you wouldn't get the effects of frequency or issue of acquisition.
I know in the auditory there's a sort of an analogous method for auditory mask priming. There's some issues with people actually hearing the primes in those cases and like actually hearing them.
Yeah, I think they might not be able to name it,
But
but there is some
it's-
effect,
yeah.
super early effect.
I just have one question. I might have been looking at the clock or something when you actually mentioned it, but how is the emotional arousal for each word actually established?
So there is this paper by Warner et al., so Warner Cooperman, and they actually they perform like a Amazon Mechanical Turk kind of thing where they asked, I guess, like hundreds of people, like, please rate this word from 1 to 5, how intense how intense feelings this word evokes in you, or something like that.
And
So it's kind of negative and positive words have to do more.
and that would have been based on native speaker judgments.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's, actually you would need to have a non-natives because ratings there too, and then plug that in rather than natives.
Yeah. Because non-native speakers just might have completely different.
Yeah. And lots of these words are actually like, because if you design like a within design, then you have to make these words like not up, but they're really infrequent words. So a lot of non-native speakers might even not know these words.
Mhm.
If you do like brother for the prod, you do like brother and brother, like
Yeah.
I as a non-native speaker didn't know any of the words in these items. So that's for sure. But you get really which is what you get across everybody is that you get the same effects for non-native and native speakers. Just the non-native speakers are much slower.
Okay.
So there's no difference in these effects, which is interesting.
Any other questions? Okay, well, let's thank the speaker. And that's the end of this session. Talks begin back in this room at 1:30. What's the time for lunch?
Just people can go to Mac Hall, and if there's a food court there, so you can kind of just pick what you'd like or snack on some food in the back. It's up to you.
So Mac Hall is from this building. You would go outside and straight that way, basically. And there's just what is it? The hub at U of A? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for translating.
Actually, it took me 5 hours to work through some
Yeah, I think this is no fever here.
Oh, no, so it's actually right.
And also maybe something that will fit.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, exactly. You get a bunch because people are panicky, but no.
Once they see the work,
Yeah, but that's the thing.
Everything.
It's just very
Yeah, but you're like no feelings about it.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing. Like,
There was one
I use like
really
close, and I think it's so much more slower for you.
but so it's not 20.
Yeah, okay.
There's
Yeah.
one person.
Oh,
Perfect. And then there's like nothing even happen.
Yeah, last year was
So there's this huge missing A plus chunk.
It's kind of nice actually, because you get the
Yeah.
nice bowl and stuff.
So it's like
I mean, I don't know, they try to get things right down in the.
except for one person.
oh yeah.
Which is kind of the goal to set for yourself with.
I would like to have
Seems like a good.
Seems
like a good.
Yeah. I can give you mine. Unfortunately, I don't know.
My brother did undergrad there, so it's even like theater.
Yeah.
But I haven't gone further. I will be there next year, yeah. Yeah. Did you come back so like? Okay, I would have been there, but I probably.
I saw the like something.
Okay.
Yeah, the first time you were really going in was like,
Which basically just.
You're the instructor. Don't do that. Or like a transition or.
Well, it was originally 1 year petition.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of someone who was on sabbatical.
Okay.
So she was like,
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it is.